So I have on my bench a Zenith 9S262 chassis, and of course the speaker. This is the famous shutter dial radio that has the motorized tuning, which incorporates a belt to this shaft, and there's a belt that's missing, of course, but it goes up to the tuning mechanism from this pulley up into the tuning mechanism. The problem, someone's worked on this radio, maybe more than one person in past years. For one thing, the last person that worked on it put a brand new line cord on it, and it's nice. It's a nice line cord. They didn't put any, they should have put a tie wrap here so that you couldn't pull it out from the back. But I'm going to replace this with a period correct looking reproduction cloth cord and plug so that it matches the era of the radio. But the last person that worked on it put this on. But many years prior to that, someone else has done some work. Up here is a 3-section electrolytic capacitor, and one of the sections, which is an 8 mic capacitor, must have gone flat. So the person that worked on it just simply bridged it with another capacitor, but didn't disconnect the lead from the capacitor that goes here. They just basically put it in parallel with the old capacitor. Not a good idea. That's a bad idea, but in some cases it's a quick fix, and this of course was a quick fix. The can ohm resistor up here, it doesn't check open, but 2 of the resistances are way high. So obviously, regardless if it's open or even if they all measured correctly, the can ohm resistor has to be replaced with newer high wattage resistors. The thing I noticed about somebody that worked on this in the past must have taken the shaft apart to put a belt on. I don't know what they did, but this pulley here does not line up with the tuning pulley that's up there. It's off. If I slide this up, it's off, considerably off. And of course the belt will probably drag on this flange that's inside this mechanism. So that's got to go, when I put the new belts on, that's got to go back on correctly. So basically what I'm going to do with this radio is I'm going to replace the can ohm resistor with new high wattage chassis mount resistors. Get rid of this capacitor, replace the 3 capacitors that are supposed to be in this can, replace this capacitor here. I'll leave the existing ones in place so that the top of the radio looks the way it always looked. I won't replace these mica caps yet. I'll just replace the paper foil capacitors first. I won't deal with any of the resistors or anything, so I'll rebuild the power supply first, put new electrolytics in it. I won't initially replace any paper foil capacitors, and then I'll power this thing up and see what I've got to work with before I start replacing capacitors and possibly resistors that are off. That are off. There's a lot of things to be done in this radio. This might be a tough one to work on, but it's going to be a fun job, I think. So I'll proceed. I'll get some parts ordered and I'll proceed from there. And so I've got the motor belt mounted and the tuner belt mounted. So that's all set to go. It all works. It tunes it. Except I don't know if this is a radio in its condition is going to tune any stations. My plan of attack on this thing is to first rebuild the power supply. I've got replacement resistors for that can ohm, and the can ohm resistors are way off in parts. So either way, those things always have to be replaced. But I'm going to put all the electrolytic capacitors in, replace the can-ohm resistor, put new electrolytics in, but I won't be changing any other resistors or paper capacitors yet. I want to see what works when I get done. I'll probably try it. I had it powered up. I brought it up slowly with a Variac, but now that I've got the tuner that I can actually tune the tuning mechanism, I'm going to see if it could possibly pull in any stations. So I'll try that next.
Live at the White House.
So it does work with existing parts. I ain't going to leave it on too long because I haven't done anything electronically. So
quite open to a range of mechanisms for his bold ideas moving forward. So certainly that's been his.
So I'll begin with rebuilding the power supply.
House Democrats are moving forward with a surface transportation bill later this week that Stocking notes has a lot of overlap with the president's more comprehensive proposal. Lisa.
Thanks, Jared. Over the week.
One thing I had to look at is the 6T5 I-tube, or is it a 6E5? I think it's a 6T5 if I remember right. And of course it doesn't glow. There's no green in there. Of course the voltages could be way off. That can-ohm resistors has two sections gone high. We'll see what it looks like after I rebuild the power supply. Now before I go through too much in changing parts and stuff, I'm mostly studying what's in this radio original, what's been done by another technician, and what needs to be done by me to rebuild it. Now here is R3, which is 100K resistor. This is a 470K resistor, and this capacitor and two resistors are tied at a tie point right here. And that's an important thing to note, because if I go down into the radio, and I don't know if I can shed enough light on it, but I'll try. Anyways, it's hard to get the camera in there, but that tie point is just, this is a newer replacement resistor, and so is the 470K, which you can't see. Here is that capacitor. The three components, resistor, and capacitor, are all tied together. And what the guy did was he just twisted the wires and soldered it, and so the junction is floating out in mid-space. That works. That really does. But it's not the way I want to do it. Now, I would think, if I can get the light on there, if you look at this, this is the 6F6 tube, and you'll notice that there is nothing in this pin socket right here, if it comes out in the camera. I believe that was the original tie point, was here. So that broke out. The component broke out of there somehow, so the tech just tied it together in mid-space. This goes out to the speaker, but here's an unused terminal, and I think I could easily use that. So I may use that as the tie point when I do that, when I put in the new parts. Another issue. I want to replace the can-dome resistor with chassis mount, and these are the ones I got. You'll notice how different in size they are. This is the 85 ohm resistor. The only thing I could find in a chassis mount resistor like this is a 50 watt resistor. Well, it'll work, but boy, size-wise that's way overkill. These are 25 watt, which is probably overkill, but that's all I could find in that value. But the real difficulty I had was the 11,000 ohm, 11K. These are 12.5 watt chassis mount resistors. Now I think 12.5 watts is going to be fine. I really think going with 25 watt resistors is way overkill, but I always believe that bigger as far as wattage in power resistors, bigger is better than going too small. But I don't know that 12.5 watts is below the limit. I'm kind of thinking that 10 watts would have been fine for these. These are 12.5 watts. The only thing I can do is install these parts and see how they work. See if anything these will be fine. The main thing is these two. I want to see if they get overly hot. That means that 12.5 watts isn't enough. But we'll give it a shot. Let's see what I can come up with. I've removed the candome resistor. I marked all of these wires and so forth as to where they connected to it. In other words, these wires connect at the junction of the 250 and 50 ohm resistor. This is at the far outside 11K. This one's at the junction of the 211K resistors. This is at the junction of the 50 and 85 ohm resistor. So basically the candome resistor wasn't open, but the resistance right here should be 85 ohms. Was like 137 ohms. That's pretty far out. You know, and these old radios, you know, they're pretty tolerant. It would work, I suppose, but this resistor is going to fail eventually. Eventually, it's going to fail, and if the 85 ohm resistor has gone high to 137, that affects everything from this tab is grounded, and that affects everything from here out to here. So there's no way I was going to leave the candome resistor in place. It really needed to be replaced. I'm in the process of rebuilding the power supply, but in doing that I'm also going to have to replace these paper wax capacitors, paper foil, because they're all involved in going in one end or the other of the candome resistor, which I took out. Here it is. So I'm going to put a series of chassis mount resistors along here, staggered, because if they can't go end to end because they're wider than the chassis. But in order to do that, I really had to start down here. This is the 12 mic 450 volt electrolytic, which on the schematic is C18, and this dog bone resistor here is 15K, but it's gone more than 20% over. It's like it's almost 21,000 ohms. Green, brown, and orange. So I'm going to replace it with, I think it's a 2 watt. I'm going to have to replace this resistor, but I put this terminal strip in here, and the reason I put that terminal strip in there was because this is the only 12 mic 450 volt electrolytic I could find from my supplier. I tried several different suppliers. I really was looking to get axial rather than radial, but this will work out just fine because I'll put it on this 2-lug terminal strip, and it's going to come out exactly the way it should, I think. And then I'm going to start rebuilding from this end over to this end, just to get the power supply redone, to eliminate the 3-section electrolytic, which is C19, 20, and 21, I believe, on the schematic, which is this can right here, right at the top here. So it's moving along. So here's my little method of laying out and mounting these chassis mount power resistors. Here's the 250 ohm resistor, and here's my template, because you can't use this and mark the holes with this, because obviously when you go underneath they're going to be opposite. So I have to make a little cardboard template, which is this one right here, and I'll use that to lay out the mounting holes. So I started working in the hardest part. This is the 250 ohm resistor mounted on this side. This lead here goes to the 12 mic electrolytic, which is isolated from chassis. That's this one here. This is the junction of the divider network. 470 ohm here down to the tube socket. Junction here, that's the unused speaker plug. I'll glue a little thing over the hole, but there's only 4 pins on the speaker plug, so this is the unused one. I'm using that as a junction. The original junction was on this tube socket, but it apparently came out, or it must have broke out. Anyway, so from here, this is 100K to the junction, 470K down. This capacitor and this capacitor terminate in between the 250 and the 50 ohm resistor, which isn't mounted yet. And here's a 0.02 that will replace this one that goes over to this terminal strip. So that's as far as I got. Working in that corner there was very, very difficult. That was difficult. So here's what I've done so far. I replaced the can dome resistor with these chassis mount power resistors. I have a little trepidation about what parts I could get. These 12.5 watt resistors are the 11,000 ohm resistors. There were 2 of them in the can dome resistor. I'm not sure if 12.5 watts is going to work. I'll have to see how hot these get. I have a feeling that all these resistors, including these, are probably overkill. This is an 85 ohm resistor. It's a 50 watt. I couldn't get an 85 watt resistor or 85 ohm resistor in any less wattage than 50 watts. So the problem with getting parts today is because of the pandemic, parts that are in stock and the values that you want are rare, and it's getting harder to get parts because in some cases companies aren't ordering anymore unless they get a large order for that same part. So I got what I could get anyways, and I'm going to test this radio shortly to see if it still works. Remember that I had it on and running at the beginning of this clip. Now there's 4, I rebuilt the power supply. These film resistors I had to replace because they were basically in the way and in the process of replacing these power resistors. But this electrolytic can here had 3 electrolytics in it, and here is an electrolytic that's isolated from the chassis. That's C18. So I've replaced C18, 19, 20, and 21 respectively. This is C18, C19, C20, and C21. Now the thing is, this giant can was a 12 mic at 450 volt electrolytic. This is the replacement. Notice how small it is. The other thing is there was a dog bone resistor right here that was supposed to be 15,000 ohms. It's supposed to be a 1 watt resistor. At least on the riders it says 1 watt. That resistor went real high. It went more than 30% out of spec. So I have two 33,000 ohm in parallel. These are half watts, but in parallel this should be a 1 watt resistor. I'll see if my thinking is correct when I power this up. If these things get real hot, well then I'm going to have to order the right resistor for this. I'll probably get a 2 watter, 15,000 at 2 watts. I still have 9 paper foil capacitors to replace, but I'm not going to replace those until I test my work that I've done here to see if the radio still works. So after replacing all the parts in the power section, the radio is playing pretty well.
Bauman has called the city's efforts soft. and is calling on the mayor to push for more enforcement by the police. Bauman says the authority is clearly the mayor's authority in terms
So
of
all of my
directing the
parts that I
vast
put in
apparatus
work
of
right.
government to act. So what does
You know, the
mayor's office
resistors are not getting too hot. Of course, the overkill ones won't, but these 11,000 ohm and then this paralleled 33,000, they're running pretty cool. So I think I got the power supply is rebuilt correctly. So in the next part of this video, there will only be a second part, is after I replace all of the remaining paper foil capacitors.